Unless you have been living under a rock for the past 2 years, you're probably all too aware of the fact that Mark Zuckerberg won't shut the up about the metaverse. Leave it alone, Mark! And your presentations are so weird. Can't you just sound like a human? Can't you just try? Instead, it sounds like you've been written a script by someone who's not even a human, and you're a human trying to perform a script written by a non-human. What's going on? You're a billionaire. Get it sorted. Hire someone from one of those shows. Come on, take an acting lesson. Jesus. Zuckerberg doesn't care what the critics say or what it costs to make his dream a reality, which is why he's invested $15 billion this year alone and $36 billion since 2019 to bring Facebook's metaverse to life. And the results speak for themselves. In the Facebook metaverse, you can experience graphics similar to, but worse than, Nintendo's Miiverse from 2012. The only difference is that in the new version, characters' avatars don't have any legs. If the goal is full immersion into a virtual reality realm, it has clearly got a really long way to go. Of course, there are other versions of the metaverse as well. Other companies have taken to use the phrase to describe things like digital ownership of in-game property through the use of NFTs and various other things like that. Currently, the term metaverse is being used a lot like the term cyberspace was in the early 1990s. It was a vague term that people didn't really understand because it was referring to a bunch of unrelated things at the same time. This is how the metaverse is being used right now, with anything related to Web3 being referred to as being tied to the metaverse. For the purposes of today's video, we're going to be focusing on Facebook's version of the metaverse as a virtual reality social media experience. We're also going to be referring to the company exclusively as Facebook because Meta's a name and a failed rebranding attempt to distract people from falling stock prices. How's it going? Seeing as Facebook's metaverse is already up and running, at least in some regard, there are already some data points. So, how is the metaverse at present looking? In a word, bad. In 2 words, real bad. The sentence, holy shit, the building's on fire. It's not going well. Since Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter, the future of the site as a popular social media hub has been put into question. We're not going to dunk on Elon today, as much as we love that, or suggest whether or not those fears about the future of the platform are warranted, but, well, they exist. Though there has been no mass exodus from Twitter as of writing this, people have already begun talking about alternatives and where they will go should Twitter collapse. There are 2 popular options that have been brought up a lot. The first is called Hive, which is described as being identical to Twitter except without Elon. The other is Mastodon, a sick metal band and also a social media platform that is so complicated to use that despite talking about complex science on this channel, we couldn't even begin to explain how their onboarding process works. While several other alternatives to Twitter were discussed as well, there was one platform that was completely absent from the discussion: the Metaverse. There were hundreds of millions of Twitter users concerned that they may need to find a new home, and not a single one thought to mention the Metaverse as an alternative solution. It doesn't bode well for Facebook that the average person would prefer to navigate a platform that seems to require a PhD to operate rather than join the Metaverse, but also shouldn't really be a surprise either, should it? According to leaked documents from Facebook, the Metaverse has yet to crack 200,000 users. By comparison, old-school RuneScape, a game released in 2013 that rolled back the less popular updates of RuneScape, essentially turning the clock back to 2007, has nearly 2 million daily users with 37 million total users. Sinking $36 billion into a project only to be less popular than a game that is perpetually stuck in 2007 is, well, not ideal. One of the big appeals of the metaverse is supposed to be a user's ability to design their own worlds to attract people who they can then theoretically monetize. In fact, much of the metaverse is about monetization, but we're going to get into that a little bit later. So these custom worlds are supposed to be the big draw, but few ever break 50 users, with the most popular one only having about 350. That's pretty depressing. The entire project just seems to be a bit of a dumpster fire, with allegations that Facebook employees are essentially forced to use the metaverse in an attempt to bolster its pathetic numbers. But Zuckerberg still insists against all evidence that this is the future. The ability to attend virtual meetings in a 3D environment is supposed to make them feel more real and immersive. It promises to bolster morale, interaction, and company productivity. It's probably worth noting at this point that, again, this is all the opinion of Mark Zuckerberg, a man widely believed to be a robot, who thusly would have very skewed perception of what human interaction and emotions are actually like. In short, is the metaverse the future? Doesn't really seem like it, and at the rate things are going, Facebook's going to go bankrupt before the project truly ever gets off the ground unless some drastic changes are made. Adding legs to the avatars is going to be a good start, but that would hardly be enough to bring about a massive influx of new users. Where it's going. Even if Facebook's metaverse is not the future, what about something like it? Where is this technology going? Now that really depends on who you ask. Experts are split nearly 50-50 on whether there is a future for some sort of virtual reality social media, or if the entire technology is dead in the water. I just also want to add my personal opinion here, that in some form, this is absolutely the future. Like, Facebook seem to be, screwing it up pretty hard right now, but there's no way that a form of this is not going to be how we're doing meetings and calls in the future. I'm calling it now. It's 2022, almost 2023. It's happening. I'm sorry, it's gonna happen. I don't know who that other 50% of experts are. Not that I'm an expert. But they must be smoking crack not to think that this is in the future at some point. Despite the near even split, the results on a per expert basis are hardly a coin toss. There are clear links drawn between the experts on each side of the debate and their belief in other technologies. For those of you who are strong believers in NFTs and crypto, the experts that agree with you are of the belief that something like the metaverse is indeed the future. But I also think crypto and NFTs are kind of just scammy bullshit. Why is this hard to believe that we're going to be putting on visors to have meetings? It's obviously how it's going to be. However, their version of the future is pretty shit. The argument in favor of it largely views everything about the virtual reality experience as an NFT, commodities that can be created, bought, and sold. It's just like real-world commerce, except everything is fake, and whatever company owns the platform gets a cut of every transaction. If you already have lots of money and would like to make even more, getting in on the ground floor of Metaverse seems like a great opportunity if it takes off. These expert predictions that will eventually take off may be based less on data or even their personal beliefs, and more based on the desires and the hope of creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. Considering somebody paid $450,000 to buy a virtual home next to Snoop Dogg in the Snoopverse, there are clearly billions, if not trillions of dollars up for grabs if something like the metaverse takes off. It's at least theoretically possible that something like this could become popular as well if Facebook's brand wasn't attached to it. People have grown increasingly wary of Facebook's business model of tracking every aspect of your life and selling that information, so it's possible that the brand, rather than the idea, is poisonous. Second Life was released in 2003 and still has an active user base, though their numbers are nowhere near what Facebook was hoping the metaverse would achieve. But at its core, despite not being an immersive VR environment, much of the user experience is similar to what the metaverse was aiming for. Its continued success shows that there is at least some demand for such an experience, but their numbers also show that it may be far more niche than Zuckerberg is prepared to admit. On the other hand, a truly immersive virtual reality is something that people have been fantasizing about for decades. If implemented properly, it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility that it could become a huge success. Of course, those decades of fantasizing have also given people time to think about the reality of the situation. What's holding it back? It's undeniable that touch screens can be useful for certain applications, but when it comes to typing, they're garbage. However, phones all discarded their tactile keyboards in favor of full touchscreens because decades of science fiction made us believe that's what we wanted. Science fiction has led us to believe that replacing our lives with a realistic virtual world is inevitable and sometimes desirable. But there's even more science fiction out there warning us that this is the absolute last thing we should want. Metaverse-style virtual realities are often shown as dystopian futures like those portrayed in Black Mirror. Seldom does anything good come from this, and it's something people are all too aware of. There's also the matter of timing, and this was absolutely the wrong time to try and embark on such an endeavor. Unless you are a misanthropic hermit living deep in the woods, totally off the grid, COVID lockdown pretty much sucked. And if you are that hermit, how the hell did you get internet access to watch this video? But seriously, lockdown was a miserable experience that had some pretty notable effects on society. Despite the myriad of ways people had to socialize virtually, including using Zoom to see a friend's real face instead of just their digital avatar, people's mental health suffered greatly. Over 70% of people noted an increase in stress and anxiety. This obviously wasn't all from the isolation, as a lot of people were terrified to death of running out of toilet paper, but a significant portion of it was. There was also a dramatic increase in drug overdoses and drug-related deaths. The point is that we all tried only interacting with other people virtually for upwards of 2 years, and for most people, it wasn't very fun. There's also the matter of cost. A basic Oculus Quest 2 is currently $400. That's not an unattainable amount of money, but it's still a lot of money. It's certainly more than someone will be willing to spend if a virtual reality chat room is the main reason they're even considering the purchase. Then there's the Meta Quest Pro, which retails for $1,500, presumably under the belief that they could sell it to large companies who will use it to conduct virtual business meetings. If you're wondering what sort of benefit there is to having your employees sit in a virtual conference room for a meeting when there's already Zoom, Slack, or good old-fashioned email, so is everyone else. There are definitely downsides to doing it this way, as the user will be impaired in a way that makes them unable to properly write or type notes if needed, but the upsides just seem to be eluding most people. One of the biggest complaints among office workers, along with how much they hate Toby and HR, is the excess amount of meetings that could have been dealt with in a simple email rather than wasting hours of everyone's day. Does anyone think people will suddenly feel better about those meetings if they take place in a poorly rendered cartoon room where none of the people at the meeting have any legs? There are also additional concerns about what the implication of wearing these VR sets are for long periods of time. Aside from being potentially uncomfortable, there may be other unforeseen risks as well. Even if being uncomfortable is the worst thing, that's still a big detractor for people spending long periods of time in an immersive virtual environment. And finally, do people even want this? Big companies absolutely want this, but do actual people? Mark Twain famously said, "Buy land." They aren't making it anymore. Creating the metaverse gives companies a way to create land that they can sell you, and clothing that they can sell your avatar. The Snoopverse even wants you to buy virtual weed for more money than it would cost you to buy actual weed that, you could smoke and get actually high. Obviously, especially when it comes to video games, there is some sort of demand for a realistic 3D virtual environment, but as a social immersion experience, that's harder to be sure of, but it does seem unlikely. Consumers in recent years have shown that, in general, they seem to prefer augmented reality over virtual reality. Until computing power vastly improves to the point that we can create a truly realistic 3D environment, augmented reality will be preferable to virtual reality for most users. By definition, it should be actual reality, but better. So is Facebook's metaverse the future? Almost definitely not. Will something like it be the future? It depends. In my opinion, probably yes. The money-hungry corporations that want to exploit social media like an opioid while also coercing its user base into making billions of dollars in predatory microtransactions for worthless NFTs get their way, then well, it's going to absolutely be a thing. Whether or not people are willing to adopt such a technology is a different story, though. There's definitely some demand for virtual reality experiences, but a VR social media platform doesn't seem to have nearly the same level of appeal. Logically, based on the popularity of MMOs and things like Second Life, it certainly seems like it should have been a slam dunk. Maybe if Facebook's version didn't look like absolute shit, in our opinion, it would have been. Or maybe people have seen enough movies and TV shows about dystopian futures where this technology has ruined society that everyone collectively decided to just give it a pass.